You know, when we think of World War I, our minds go straight to the trenches, the mud, the chaos. But there was another battlefield, one that was just getting started. And it wasn't fought with guns, but in operating theaters. This is the incredible story of how one of the worst conflicts in human history accidentally gave birth to a brand new field of medicine, modern plastic surgery. A field that wasn't just about fixing faces, but about piecing identities back together. This quote from Lindsay Fitzharris's amazing book, The Facemaker, just hits you right in the gut, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the psychological horror of it all. See, a soldier could lose an arm or a leg and be celebrated as a hero. But losing your face? That was different. Your face is your identity. It's how you connect with the world. To lose it was to become an outcast, a monster in a society that just couldn't cope with that kind of trauma. So let's really dig into the scale of this crisis. What exactly were these soldiers up against? It was a type of wound that, frankly, society wanted to just look away from.
In France, they came up with a name for these men: les gueules cassées, the broken faces. And we're not talking about a few isolated incidents here. This was an entire generation of men coming home with their faces and their lives completely shattered. The world had never, ever seen anything like it on this scale.
The numbers are just staggering. Over 20 million soldiers were injured in World War I, and among them, thousands upon thousands suffered these horrific facial injuries. So you have to ask, why? What made this war so different? Well, it all came down to the new and uniquely brutal way the fighting was done.
Yeah, this really breaks it down. Military technology had taken this massive leap forward, but medicine was way behind. Think about it. In trench warfare, the only part of you that's really exposed is your head. You peek over the top for just a second, and a bullet or a piece of shrapnel could change your life forever. And these new high explosives didn't make clean wounds. They just obliterated flesh and bone. On top of all that, the trenches were dug in farmland, so the soil was full of nasty bacteria. Infection wasn't just a risk, it was almost a guarantee.
But in the middle of all this darkness, one man saw a path forward. He wasn't a general, he was a surgeon, and he had a vision that would change everything. Let's talk about the guy who became known as the father of modern plastic surgery.
This is him, Sir Harold Gillies. He was a brilliant ear, nose, and throat surgeon from New Zealand. When the war started, he volunteered and got sent right to the Western Front. And what he saw there, it just horrified him. He saw men with catastrophic injuries being patched up in bits and pieces with no real plan. He knew right then and there that this wasn't going to work. Something radical had to be done. And he moved incredibly fast. In 1915, he has this light bulb moment. By 1916, he's already talked the army into giving him a special unit. But that wasn't enough for him. He believed these men deserved a place built just for them. And by 1917, he gets it. Queen Mary's Hospital at Sidcup. This was the world's very first hospital dedicated only to rebuilding faces. I mean, what a huge leap forward.
And this was the promise he made to every shattered man who came through his doors. He got that his job was more than just surgery. It was about restoring hope. He was treating the person, not just the wound. This quote just perfectly sums up his entire mission, right? It's confident, it's reassuring, and it's deeply, deeply human.
So the big question is, how did he actually do it? The instruction manual for this kind of surgery just didn't exist. Gillies and his team had to invent it on the fly, pushing medicine into a whole new world.
All right, the single biggest breakthrough they had was this thing called the tubed pedicle. Before this, trying to graft skin onto a face was a total gamble. Most of the time, the graft would die from infection or lack of blood. What Gillies figured out was genius. He'd take a flap of healthy skin from, say, the chest and roll it into a tube. This tube acted like a protected pipeline, keeping the blood flowing directly to the new spot. In a world without antibiotics, this was a massive game changer.
The story of a sailor named William Vicarage really brings this to life. He was horribly burned at the Battle of Jutland. Gillies took a flap of skin from his chest, tubed it, and then attached one end to his jaw. For weeks, Vicarage walked around with this bizarre-looking stock of living tissue connecting his chest to his face. But once the new blood supply was established, Gillies detached the tube, unrolled it, and used that healthy skin to literally build him a new face. He even made new eyelids so the man could finally close his eyes again. It was nothing short of a miracle.
But it wasn't just about skin. They were innovating everywhere. Anesthesiologists had to invent new ways to keep patients breathing when their jaws and windpipes were destroyed. Dentists became absolutely essential, using wires to rebuild jawbones and creating internal structures to give the face its shape back. It was a complete top-to-bottom reconstruction.
And this is where the story gets even more fascinating. Gillies knew that science alone wasn't enough. He understood that rebuilding a face was just as much an art form. So what he created was basically the world's first modern multidisciplinary medical team. It wasn't just a surgeon working alone. He brought in everyone: specialist nurses, dentists, anesthetists, and, this is the kicker, artists and sculptors. This idea of a team approach is the absolute standard for complex medicine today, but back then, it was totally revolutionary. One of the most important members of this team was a man named Henry Tonks. He had actually trained to be a surgeon before becoming a famous artist. Gillies brought him in to create a visual record. And these pastel drawings, they are hauntingly beautiful. They weren't just for the history books, they were critical medical documents. They showed color and texture in a way photos couldn't, helping the surgeon's plan. But they did something more. They captured the person behind the injury.
At the same time, over in Paris, another artist was attacking the problem from a totally different angle. For the men whose injuries were just too severe to be fully fixed by surgery, an American sculptor named Anna Coleman Ladd offered another kind of hope. She made these incredibly delicate, custom-painted copper masks. They were so lifelike. They weren't a cure, but they gave these men a social face, allowing them to go outside without being stared at in horror. Okay, so this all happened over 100 years ago. Why is it still so important? Well, because the ideas that started at Sidcup became the very foundation of modern surgical care, and especially modern nursing.
You can draw a straight line from what Gillies was doing back then to how a modern surgical team operates today. His focus on treating the whole person, that's now called perioperative nursing and patient advocacy. His understanding that you had to help men mentally and emotionally, that's a core part of patient care. That collaborative team he built, that's now the gold standard for any complex case.
And you can see how those big ideas have now become the core principles of nursing. Patient advocacy, psychological support, the drive for perioperative excellence, and collaborative care. All of it can be traced right back to those early days at Queen Mary's Hospital.
So as we wrap up this incredible story, it really leaves us with some pretty big questions to think about.
Think about it. Gillies and his team invented these techniques out of desperation, just to give soldiers back a basic life, the ability to eat, to breathe, to not be seen as a monster. It was all about function. Today, a lot of those very same techniques are used for elective cosmetic surgery. So the question is, how does that history, this origin story born out of necessity, affect how we think about the ethics of plastic surgery today, when the goal is often aesthetic enhancement rather than functional restoration? It's a really interesting thing to chew on.
And by the way, if you want to dive deeper into this, our look today was heavily based on some incredible sources, like Lindsay Fitzharris's book, The Facemaker, technical works like the Atlas of Extreme Facial Cancer, and the unbelievably moving patient files of Sir Harold Gillies himself. It is a raw, powerful piece of history, and I can't recommend learning more about it enough. Thanks for joining me.